Ice is melting due to climate change. If Antarctica and Greenland all melt down, sea levels would rise by 80 meters, and they're melting faster and faster. Many researches have already been done regarding sea levels rise, but we realized that when our group combined all of our disciplines together, we can come up with a unique research regarding rising sea level. So our research question is, compare and contrast Australia and China, how they respond to their rising sea level, how they cooperate internationally, and how can their response affect regional level and minorities in their country. Our strategy is to address this problem was to view it as a funnel because our disciplines represent 3 different stages. We're going to zoom into 2 countries, Australia and China, from their global stage to national, regional, and finally to the minorities. The main focus of our research was to see to what extent could that affect the minorities that live in China and Australia. Before we start, let's first have a look at how movies in these 2 countries portray rising sea levels. This gives us a taste of how each countries are aware of rising sea level.
Movies have been a great way in order to help visualize and explain to mass audiences the effects climate change and rising sea levels will have on mass populations. As writers such as Martin Heidegger and Jonathan Jacobs have pointed out, the humanities allow us to provide valuations on the world around us, and documentary and fiction films allow us to point to issues facing humanity today. In China, filmmakers have explored their rising sea levels in several fiction films, most interestingly in Bugs and The Wandering Earth. Both films use metaphor and symbolism to imagine scenarios in which our oceans are deadly to us, and industrialisation has led to our doom. Funnily enough, both films are from the science fiction genre, a speculative mode of storytelling where filmmakers look at the present to imagine the future. In each film, they have looked at the current rise in sea levels in China and have explored what could happen in the future. In Australia, The Last Wave is an example of a film where the looming threat of water to make humanity extinct acts as a moral messenger for colonial invasion and the industrialisation and destruction of nature in the Western world. As Matthew Campora asserts in his video essay Reclaiming Uncanny Spaces, Australian Landscapes from the New Wave to the New Indigenous Cinema, the protagonist's visions of a city engulfed in a raging flood condense his fear of nature's punishment for polluting the earth. Internationally, documentaries such as Anthropocene, The Human Epoch, and Before the Flood explore the current state of rising sea levels, what is causing them, and what are nations' solutions. In Before the Flood, the documentarians play a series of footage from raging floods across the world to make the audiences aware of the horrors of our current situation. Later they go to the Arctic to see what is causing these floods, where the audience is given insight into the melting ice caps and how that is contributing to the rise in sea level. Using a rope, the image of the 2 men as they stand far apart from one another is meant to signify how much ice has melted over the past few years. Aerial shots then capture the excessive rushing waters spilling out into the ocean that is causing rising sea levels. In Anthropocene, they feature lingering shots of the construction of a seawall in China used to protect oil fields. The image haunts the audience at the length and scale of this construction, along with how the earth is being altered to resolve issues caused by these companies in the first place.
Now, let's have a look at Australia. According to Special Report on the Ocean, even with immediate cuts to carbon emissions, sea level may still rise more than 50 centimeters by 2100. The potential replacement cost of residential places are estimated at $63 billion. Under international climate agreement, Australia needs to meet 2 goals regarding greenhouse gas emissions: 5% below 2000 levels by 2020 and around 26% below 2005 levels by 2030. China, on the other hand, is one of the countries that exhales largest amount of greenhouse gases. So the destiny of China really depends on how they prevent it. Chinese government has actually launched Sponge City initiative, which is strategy to relocate millions of citizens further from the coastal line and to reuse 70% of the storm water. They have adopted this idea originated from Hyderabad in India. Should we now zoom in to have a closer look at how rising sea level would affect regional level?
Shanghai is the financial capital of China and an international metropolis with a permanent population of 27 million. Behind its prosperity, Shanghai is known as the most flood-prone city because its average elevation is only 4 meters above sea level. Sea level rise will have a disastrous impact on Shanghai's ecology, economy, and population. Climate Central estimates that 76% of the Shanghai region's current population lives in areas that would eventually be underwater if the Earth warms by 4 degrees by 2100. On the other hand, Sydney is the financial capital of Australia and the city which has around 5.2 million permanent population. Although sea level rise won't affect Sydney as much as it will affect Shanghai, it will bring huge economic losses to the coastal areas. According to the Department of Climate Change report, between 40,000 and 63,000 residential buildings in New South Wales may be at risk of inundation from a sea level rise of 1.1 meters. Also, if sea levels continue to rise, Sydney Airport is in danger of being flooded by the end of the 21st century. Aboriginal people are an often neglected group in Australia, especially when it comes to sea level rise. Kowanyama is a Gulf coastal plain located 40 kilometers from the coast in Queensland and has a population of approximately 1,000 people. Aborigines living there are particularly susceptible to the changes in sea level. The delicate balance between salt water and fresh water has nurtured life in this arid land. The region's Aborigines relied on the separate but complementary freshwater and saltwater ecosystems for drinking water. But sea level rise could also result in the intrusion of salt water into the freshwater ecosystem, and it would lead to environmental changes. Also, we are certain Aborigines' ancestral stories and attachment to country. On the other hand, the rise in sea levels also involves the identity of indigenous people because they care more about where they are moving to and who they will be than about ecological change.
When many subject areas are studying why rising sea levels affect an ethnic group, as an anthropology student, I choose this angle as I am more curious as to whether certain ethnic groups themselves have particular characteristics that make them more vulnerable to climate change. After doing my research, I gained a conclusive concept which is called vulnerability. Although there is little literature pointing to the impact of rising sea levels on ethnic minorities, a number of vulnerability assessments have shown that less developed ethnic minorities have a relatively vulnerable response to rising sea levels comparing to large cities in China. For example, sea level rise damages the ecosystem of the Zhuang autonomous region in Guangxi province, China, and seriously affecting the food, water, and economic sources on the coastal area that they rely on. In addition, this area lacks economic and technological development, which contributes a high degree of vulnerability and sensitivity to rising sea levels. Therefore, to assist Zhuang autonomous region being more adaptable to sea level rise, the government needs to take urgent measures. Specifically, there are 3 responses that could be taken in the future. First, it is suggested to build water conservancy facilities to substitute weak agricultural equipments in the coastal minority area of Guangxi. Secondly, due to the rising water temperature, the available water resources in the coastal Zhuang autonomous region cannot be effectively utilized. Therefore, in terms of resources, they should apply to the government for increasing financial and scientific to optimize the resources allocation between regions. Finally, in terms of education, the government should step up publicity and incorporate the impact of rising sea levels into educational materials so as to cultivate awareness of climate change prevention and adaptation.
Although rising sea levels are one of the well-known problems, there's still not much studies or policy regarding the potential relocation of Aboriginals around the globe, and the lack of concerns about them are unacceptable. These issues that could be faced by minorities should be better dealt with IPCC, UN, or other organizations to implement a better policy, because our local Aborigines or other minorities' knowledge and culture are as invaluable as others.